it comes to the TV show Good Times, I'm going to be completely honest and say I found it to be an okay show. Firstly, I really did enjoy the animation style. It was quite intriguing, and whilst I would say in most episodes there was nothing spectacular, but in others like episode 8 for example, they actually really step up the creativity. It looked really beautiful, quite creative from a visual standpoint, and it just looked quite comic book styled from the animation way, and I thought that was quite cool. My next thing I really enjoyed was the voice acting. I think the cast was amazing, but the two that really stood out for me was JB Smoove and Gerald Johnson, who voiced Reggie, the dad of the family, and Dalvin, the drug dealing baby. I just really enjoyed those characters. I think they were probably the backbone of the show. Something small but I really did enjoy was the violence in the show, as I was not expecting it to be so gruesome in certain aspects, but it was definitely something that kept me wanting to continue watching, which I will say was needed with this show. Something which I really also enjoyed was how they took insects, rodents, animals, and even the sun and made them these characters, having like little quips here and there, and having a huge effect on not only the family but also the neighbourhood that they lived in, especially the son, who seemed to be somewhat an antagonist in a sense, as it's out to get the neighbourhood and create all sorts of tension and violence to happen around this area. I just thought that was quite a very weird but cool thing to add in. I just think that was something they should have done more in. This show does have its moments of humour. I'll be completely honest and say it wasn't like pause the TV because I'm laughing too much type of moments, or like really memorable, but it has the essence of humour, which I feel like was decent enough. And one of the main things I really loved about this show is how they took metaphors to the extreme. There's two great examples I noticed. The first one is in the second episode of the series. Junior is taking medication so that it helps him concentrate more, and his concentration starts to take over. But once that medication goes missing, concentration is metaphorically dying inside his head and wants to escape, and then it literally escapes out of his skull. It becomes this very weird thing, but I thought it was quite cool as well. It definitely captured my interest when it did that. But the best one is in the episode afterwards, where we see Grey having her first period and goes against her mother's wishes and actually uses a tampon. But as she goes to use it, she and her mother are sucked into the tampon machine, and it becomes this huge metaphor for how Grey is going into womanhood and how she should just believe in herself and ignore others and just be what she wants to be. And then we're seeing it from the mother's point of view of realising that all this anguish of going against tampons and so forth is a generational trauma that her mother passed down onto her and so forth, and she's realising to not do that with her own daughter and let her do whatever she wants, even if it's something she doesn't really want, but she should allow it because it's her daughter and shouldn't throw that trauma onto her. What I really loved about some of these episodes, especially when it came to the metaphors, is they did an intriguing exploration, and I'll say occasionally did a great execution of these metaphors as well. Now when it comes to the ending of this show, I'm going to be 100% honest and say I found it to be a bit disappointing for quite a few factors. Firstly, I just found it to be lacking any sort of humour, which is really disappointing for a show, especially on its finale. And secondly, I found the main plot of the show just lacking any interest for me. The only thing that really did intrigue me was the glow up of Junior, as in the previous episode he slightly got infatuated with a gang member's girl, and in order to be with her he decides to join that gang. We're seeing the aftermath of that, and we're seeing how much of a change this girl and this gang has had on him, for better or worse, and I just enjoyed watching that journey go forth. But then it really has this weak ending, somewhat ending on a Who Shot JR reference, which I feel like is a very odd way to end it, because I feel like obviously the show is called Good Times, which is loosely connected to the 1970s sitcom, and obviously Dallas was quite big in the 70s and 80s. I just don't believe that generation is watching this show, and so generation like myself, so millennials and Gen Z, when we're watching it we might just like scratching our heads like, what is this reference? It's a very odd reference to throw out there personally. Now when it comes to criticisms, I do have my fair share. Firstly is towards the satire in the show. It's not subtle, it's quite in your face, and I gotta be honest, it could have been better. I just felt like it was a very much attack or anti-white people show, as they are saying essentially in the show that all the problems that African American families or African American people have to go through on a day-to-day basis, whether that be poverty, whether it be gangs, or just the lack of change in their neighbourhood, is all down to white people, and that we are the ones holding black people back. And so when I see them painting this image of all white people are behind black people's problems, whilst there's a hint of truth in that, I do feel like it's also painting black people as this victim and giving them that victimhood that they've been carrying for quite some time. Like, I kind of feel like it's somewhat damaging to the average African American to believe that they're constantly this victim and they can never really get past that hurdle. If someone sets them back by doing that, but also at the same time it also allows ignorance to be at play, as, oh well, if the system is against me and I can never change it, what is the point? Let's continue on this destructive matter that they believe that white people have put them on. And I feel like that kind of destroys hope and is slightly ignorant on the show's path. Obviously, I know I'm looking too deep into it, but at the same time, if I can look too deep into it, I'm pretty sure many African Americans can also see that. The show doesn't paint an alternative, because we even see the mother of the house dabble in politics, attempting to fight against the system, but then it's being manipulated and used by the system. So it just shows that either way, this system that they are fighting against will always corrupt them, and there's no change. And I just think that there's such a hopeless message in that. And I just think it's quite a bad message to put out there, but that's just me. So my second critique is about the lack of humour in the show. Now, I did mention there was an essence, but that is literally it. There's nothing big or memorable when it comes to the humour in this show. I can't remember a big moment that this show has. Really quite disappointing for a show like this. My third criticism is towards the character of Gray, who to me is the embodiment, or at least an attempt of embodying, Lisa Simpson and Huey Freeman and putting them into one. For the main fact, I just didn't think she was that likeable of a character. When Lisa gets to do a schemy type of plan against a particular person, when it goes through, she feels guilt, she feels all this somewhat traumatic emotions, and she definitely feels guilty about it and tries to solve it. With Gray, we don't see any of that, and it just really doesn't make her a likeable character, at least in my eyes. And she also was probably the least funny character on the show. Now, when it comes to my fourth and final critique, is of the title itself, Good Times. Now, obviously, I understand to a slight extent of why they named it like that, because obviously Bel-Air, with what happened with that, and people really blew up, it got a lot of viewership. Netflix are attempting to do the same, but the difference between Good Times and Bel-Air is Bel-Air isn't too old. People still talk about it. Will Smith is still a big icon in that show. Try and name me an actor from Good Times. I'm not being mean, but it wasn't that big on the next few generations, if I'm being truly honest. It may have had an influence on those other shows, but no one's talking about Good Times as big as they are talking about Bel-Air or the Bill Cosby Show or the Chappelle Show. But yeah, that's me just being truly honest. But also, this is a show that is 50 years old. I just don't feel like the people that grew up watching Good Times are going to be watching this. And if they are, they're definitely not going to be enjoying it. They're not going to be watching it for the references or to the late 80s and all of that. And so I feel like already it's kind of done a very terrible marketing. From a marketing perspective, the idea works very well, but in actuality it isn't, because you got my generation, which is Gen Z, watching it and kind of slightly understanding it. Then you got millennials who might not even like the show itself, but understand the references more. But then you got other generations who won't even like the show and won't want to hear the references because they're not going to watch the show. And so it's kind of a weird target audience they're going after, and quite an unrealistic one as well. I really think the title idea was a bad one on them. Whoever came up with it didn't do the idea well. Overall, I have to be honest and say this show is below average at best. I feel like there were some intriguing concepts, but not the greatest of executions for the most part. I feel like it borrowed heavily from other shows, but not being good enough to execute it like they did. I felt certain characters will just rip off some other shows. The humour in this show wasn't that great, which is even more disappointing as we have this great cast of voice actors, but alas, they didn't pull it off. Is this show good? I'm going to be asked to say, sadly, no. Racing wise, I'm going to be nice and say a 4 out of 10. Now when it comes to would I rewatch it? Again, sadly no. The only thing I really did enjoy about this show was the strained relationship between Reggie and Dalvin. I really did enjoy those two characters. Everything else just didn't gravitate to me. It really wasn't hooking enough. Now when it comes to recommendations, there are plenty of shows to recommend. Firstly, if you're looking for a TV show about a black family, look no further than The Boondocks. It's got great satirization that this show failed to do, and it also has just an amazing animation style, which is definitely based upon anime. They definitely got a huge influence there, but it's very funny. It's beautiful to look at as well. Next, if you're looking for a show based upon a family on Netflix, look no further for F is for Family, a great animated show which has the foul language and foul scenery, very hysterical, but also has a heart, which this show definitely lacked. And then if you're looking for a show which is more modern on its satirization, South Park is a great example. Not only for its great satirization of the news, especially the more current news, but at the same time it's very violent, foul as hell, and it's just stupidly juvenile as well. It's just brilliant. I love the juvenileness in that show. And then lastly, how can I not talk about The Simpsons, a show which I did feel they tried to take a lot of, especially with the characters of Gray and Junior, who you can somewhat see being like Bart and Lisa, just about the friendliness and the heartfelt moments. Oh, and you can somewhat see the Reggie and his wife, and to an extent, Marge and Homer, but again, to a lesser extent. Those are my recommendations. This has been my review for the TV show Good Times. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed, please like and subscribe, but most importantly, thank you and have a nice day.